Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2018-2019 Lectures in Catholic Experience. And as always, a special welcome if there are any of you here for the first time, or if there are any of you that haven't been here for a while and thought, sure, when it's 25 degrees below zero, I will come to a lecture. So thank you very much for coming. Happy that you could be with us. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. The university is situated on the Haldeman Tract, the land that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. We give thanks for the privilege to work and live on this land, and we are committed to building respectful relationships with Indigenous peoples and communities to enhance our knowledge and to learn how we can have an active role in reconciliation. My name is Christina Vanine, and I'm happy to be able to coordinate this lecture series. Before we get started, if you haven't done so, would you please turn off your cell phones? That would be wonderful. On March the 8th, in the year 2000, one of the world's foremost calligraphers, Donald Jackson, began to write the first words of the St. John's Bible. And those words were from the beginning of the Gospel of John, appropriately. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. As various commentators on the Bible have said, creating a handwritten, illuminated Bible in an age of e-books and screens is a kind of a daring project. The Benedictine community at St. John's Abbey and University in Minnesota commissioned this Bible for the 21st century. A Bible that uses traditional methods and materials while at the same time engaging contemporary questions and concerns. So the nature of this project suggests that this is not a text like other texts. This is a body of writings that deserve to be read carefully, to be pored over, pondered, savored, wrestled with. Writing the Bible by hand also suggests that this is a deeply human text. These words were passed down, in many cases orally, generation by generation. And that act of human transmission is very tangible and direct with this Bible. And when you take the time to read the words of the St. John's Bible, you find that even the size of the pages and the calligraphic script invite you to slow down. As Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, has said, we tend today to read greedily and hastily as we do so many other things. This beautiful text offers an insight into that lost skill of patient and prayerful reading. The St. John's Bible is indeed a Bible for our time. Strands of DNA, magnified images of viruses are woven into the 160 illuminations. In this Bible, you see images from the Hubble telescope, mandalas, patterns from Middle Eastern and South Asian textiles, images from Aboriginal rock paintings, butterflies, dragonflies, bumblebees, and much more. This evening, we are fortunate to have Jonathan Homrighausen with us to talk about how this Bible intertwines beauty and justice and presents us with a call for social ethics in this century. Mr. Homrighausen is an Episcopal writer and scholar on scripture, art, and interreligious dialogue. He is currently pursuing a PhD in Hebrew Bible or Old Testament at Duke University, after earning his MA in Biblical Studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He also works for Lucinda Mosher of Neighbor Faith Consultancy, helping various clients walk deliberately into religious difference. His latest book, which you're going to hear about tonight, Illuminating Justice, The Ethical Imagination of the St. John's Bible, was published by Liturgical Press in 2018, and it explores this call to social ethics. Mr. Homrighausen is also co-author with J. David Plains of the book Biblical Hebrew Vocabulary by Conceptual Categories. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Homrighausen to speak to us on the topic of his book, Illuminating Justice, The Ethical Imagination of the St. John's Bible.
Thank you all for coming here tonight. And thank you to Christina Vanine for hosting me and being so gracious with your hospitality. I feel this is a good evening to talk about the Bible because I feel a little apocalyptic right now. I'm from California. I'm not used to this. Anything below about 50 degrees Fahrenheit is don't go outside. And, at this point, it's like, okay, come on, is God around the corner? What's happening? So I'm feeling very biblical this evening. Tonight, I want to tell you a few stories. First, the story of the St. John's Bible, but also some of the stories that the St. John's Bible tells that I talk about in my book. The story of the St. John's Bible itself, let's see, is this doing it? The St. John's Bible itself begins when the monks of St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota, wanted a way to celebrate the beginning of the third Christian millennium in a way that would honor their Benedictine, Catholic, Christian heritage. And part of that heritage, of course, is manuscripts. In the Middle Ages, the Benedictine scriptoria were copying manuscripts and keeping literature alive, and sometimes making those manuscripts very, very beautiful. So on the left, the Lindisfarne Gospels from England, and on the right, this is a manuscript of St. John's Revelation. And yes, that is gold. Enter Donald Jackson. Donald Jackson had been the Queen's calligrapher, and he had been associated with the monks of St. John's for a few decades. In the English language calligraphy world, Donald Jackson is a big name. And he was born in 1938. And he went to art school at the age of 13, and in his early 20s started working for the Queen. This is the kind of thing that he learned how to do in school. He learned the traditional techniques of calligraphy, illumination, gilding. How do you prepare vellum? How do you cut a quill? And part of the best way to learn how to do that is by copying the medieval manuscripts. So this is a student piece he did when he was 19. And on the left, this is a copy, an image of the work that he did. And on the right is the original manuscript that he copied from. And there's a funny story about this I can tell in Q&A if you want to know. So even though the photo I have of his work is not in color, you can see the precision, the detail, copying out these medieval miniatures and learning these ancient techniques that he would then bring to the St. John's Bible. And when he finished art school, he wrote his thesis on Christian symbolism. So these topics were never far from his mind. As early as 1970, he expressed his dream to make a Bible, which he said, for a calligrapher, this is the Sistine Chapel. It is the ultimate challenge. And this is a piece he did in the mid-70s, and if you've spent any time with the St. John's Bible, especially the Gospels volume, you see some things that look very familiar. So these angels, let's see, can I get this to work? There we go. This Gilded Christ, which may look familiar from Luke, these angels that you see all over the St. John's Bible. He's developing this iconography already, and he's looking for a patron. But the St. John's Bible, just like the Bible itself, is not only his artistic vision. I'm trying to give you a sense of what a crazy undertaking this is, and maybe why nobody had done it on this scale for 500 years. Because the Bible itself is this diverse symphony of different voices from different times, different literary styles, letters, poems, narratives, and the art had to reflect that. So he's the conductor of this symphony that is the St. John's Bible. He has his own artistic vision, and he's doing a lot of the art himself, but he's also working with several other artists who all have their own distinct styles, and he's trying to harmonize that, to bring that together into a coherent whole, just like the Bible itself. So some of these artists, for example, on the left, Thomas Ingmeyer, this is his Beatitudes. And he takes the words themselves and makes them into the image. On the right, Chris Tomlin, who is what you might call a scientific illustrator. And people love these. I always like to show them. When you're handwriting a Bible, you're going to make mistakes. And if you make your mistake 4 lines down and you don't realize you've made your mistake until the very bottom of the page, you could scratch out all of that text until you get back to where your mistake was. Or you could do what they did here. So here, they forgot a line, right? Let's see. Still not used to this. They forgot a line here. And so, there's a bee pulling it into place. People love these. There's another one where there's a lemur, there's also a dove. And so even the mistakes are often the things that when people come and see the St. John's Bible, they say, show me the mistakes. I don't know if that was the intention. More artists. On the left, Suzanne Moore, who lives and works in Seattle. And she does a lot of very abstract designs for the St. John's Bible. This is her image of Ruth and Naomi, and I remember visiting her, and she was showing me some of the sketches that she did for this. This was actually she used models. She had her husband and somebody else put bath towels over their heads and took a photo of them from behind, and that was the model for this. Lots of stories. On the right, Aidan Hart, a Greek Orthodox icon writer. And what he's doing in the St. John's Bible are not technically Orthodox icons, but he's drawing on that style. This is from the book of Acts. This is the life in community. And they're around the liturgical table. And if you look in the background, there's things we expect to see, like Jesus and angels and Mary, and then this chapel at St. John's University and the bell tower of St. John's Abbey Church. So they put their own life into this Bible as well. So all of these different styles that Donald is bringing together into a whole. To get a sense of the scale, they thought it would take about 6 years when they started, and sometimes it's very good that the Holy Spirit doesn't show you everything you have to do to finish when you take on a new project, because it took them longer than that. It ended up taking 13 years, and I love having these images of the popes because you get a sense of the scale of this. So there's John Paul II on the top left, and he's receiving the Gospels and Acts, a copy of that volume. And there's Benedict, and then of course at the bottom, Pope Francis looking at the final illumination in the book of Revelation. And the story I heard about this was he saw it and he had no words. He just threw up his hands like, there's nothing I can say, and backed away. It's a very Pope Francis thing, right? The dramatic gesture. If you've been lucky enough to see what you have in your own diocese, and I'm very jealous that you have one in your diocese, is the Heritage Edition, this high-quality artistic facsimile of the whole thing, of which there are only 299. I put these images up because I want you to get a sense of the scale of this Bible. This is not a pocket Bible you can put in your purse. 2 people have to carry it, and when the whole thing is open, it's 3 feet wide and 2 feet tall. So even before you've opened the book, it is present. It is powerful. And Donald Jackson tells a story of visiting St. John's before the project started. And they were carrying the Gospels. He was at Mass. They were carrying the Gospel book out in procession. And it was this little book. And he remembered thinking, we should have a Bible that reflects what we think this is. It's huge. And that is what the Bible is in Christian life. It's this huge thing we have to carry around. It's this heritage that we live with. And we have a lot of responsibility there. So even the size, I think, is theological. On top of that, this is not only a monument of technical skill, and it really is, because they're cutting the quills, they're getting the vellum, and where do you get over 1,000 pages of vellum in this day and age? I don't know if any of you know a vellum supplier in your neighborhood. I don't think they carry that at, do you have Walmart in Canada or Target, whatever the big box store is? And it's not only an artistic achievement, the Sistine Chapel for a calligrapher. There was also an immense theological and exegetical thought that went into this, because the artists were being advised by a committee at St. John's University, the Committee on Illumination and Text. And they would figure out what passages would be treated, and then write up suggestions on how do we treat those passages. So, for example, the beginning of the Gospel of John, they know they wanted an illumination of the beginning of John, and so they get together in a meeting, and they open with prayer, and then the biblical scholar shares what his vision was, and this was Michael Patella, the New Testament scholar on the committee, who I understand will be here in this diocese tomorrow, Sunday, okay? And then the theologians would share their perspective on the passage. The woman, Sister Joanna Becker, who was an art historian, might chime in with, well, how has this been treated in art before? And also, I love to put this here, Father Columbus Stewart was on the committee. If you've maybe seen him on 60 Minutes, he's the monk who's going to the Middle East and digitizing all of these Islamic manuscripts and saving them for the future in case they are destroyed. So there's this whole committee that's writing up these briefs, sending them to Donald, and Donald and all of the artists are having their own ideas. It's this constant back and forth. And then Donald is also overseeing all of the other artists and a whole team of scribes who are writing out the text itself, because it's not just the illuminations. They wrote the whole Bible. And Donald Jackson designed the script, and then he had to teach the script to a bunch of scribes. And this is not a medieval Bible, say, where they're all monks living and working in the same monastery. These are all of the artists are people who live in different places, have their own lives, their own careers. So it's an immense challenge just to coordinate the whole thing. So when I came to the project, I knew that there was all of this exegetical work behind it. But when I started showing the Bible more and more, I began to see certain stories, certain symbols that showed up again and again across the scripture, and how this Bible calls us to see our world, because the images that we look at also image how we see the world. If we're looking at art that dehumanizes people, that ignores their being made in the image of God, we will begin to see the world in that way. You know, it's the intellectual equivalent of you are what you eat. So this Bible invites us, I found, in different ways to form our ethical imagination. And it's the beauty that invites us in. So each of the chapters of my book talks about one of these ethical issues that we face in our own time and how the St. John's Bible responds to it. This is an image you might have seen of John Paul II, who did so much for the church's peacemaking with Jews and understanding of Judaism. And he's embracing the chief rabbi of Rome. And this is all part of what the church has done since Vatican II, Nostra Aetate, a call for dialogue with other religions, dialogue with the world. Contrast to this. This is a common motif in medieval art. And anybody know what this is? These are the personifications of the church and the synagogue. And I think you can probably guess which is which. On the left, the church, she is triumphant. Her scepter is tall. She's holding a chalice. She stands proud and confident. And on the right, the synagogue, her scepter is broken and she's blind. And if this is the image that you have of Jews, how will you then see the Jews, the real live people, in your neighborhood, in your community? And so there's the whole heritage of anti-Judaism, of violence that runs in our history. Images matter. Contrast to this one. This was the first illumination that they completed in the St. John's Bible, the first one that was shown publicly. And this is the opening to the Gospel of Matthew. This is the genealogy, right? This is Jewish, I call it the Jewish street cred of Jesus. He's a descendant of Abraham. He's a descendant of David. He is in this lineage. And they honored that in this work because his whole family tree is there. All of the names, let's see. All of the names of the people in the genealogy. At the top, Jesus. At the very bottom, Abraham. And in Hebrew, and in the shape of a menorah, the central Jewish symbol. So it's the menorah, it's the family tree, it's underlining the Jewishness of Jesus, but there's also images from other religious traditions. So the candles of the menorah at the top, these are geometric patterns from Islamic manuscripts. And in the arms of the menorah, this bright red, yellow, and blue motif taken from Tibetan Buddhist art. And at the very bottom, there's Abraham in the middle at the base of the menorah. And on the left, Sarah, her name in Hebrew and English. And on the right, Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, the whole Islamic heritage in that little Arabic word at the bottom. But wait, there's more. Not only are all the names in Hebrew, they've added more names to the genealogy because the genealogy mostly has the men. Well, it's hard to keep a family tree going with no women. So they add the names of the women. There's this whole openness in this illumination, and yet so centrally Jewish. And my favorite part, in the arms of the menorah, between the arms of the menorah, there are, let's see, can I get this to work? DNA strands, which Christina Vanine mentioned. And to me, these are the DNA strands of heredity, of a family tree, but also a reminder to think about our own spiritual inheritance. But I was showing this once, and somebody pointed out to me, well, there's a DNA strand next to Mary, but not next to Joseph. The details that they thought through, because of course, theologically, Joseph didn't contribute any DNA. He's the stepfather, so to speak. Seen those little comic where Jesus is a little kid, mad at his, Joseph, you're not my real dad. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So at the first public exhibit of images from the St. John's Bible at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, Donald Jackson had a bit of a panic moment. He thought, what if people see this and they feel like we have maybe taken a symbol that isn't ours, appropriated something? And he showed this to the director of the Minneapolis Institute of Art, who was Jewish. And the director said, no, we must have this here. There's that reception, that openness, that dialogue. But what I had found was that the menorah shows up all over the St. John's Bible. So Abram, soon to be renamed Abraham, is visited by God, and God says to him, "Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky." And Abraham looks up in the sky, and what does he see? Menorah, the family tree. And these menorahs actually have leaves in the branches. I don't know how well you can see, but there's some of the leaves. And at the top, the names of the 12 tribes of Israel in gold. So the family tree is going. The family tree here really begins with Abraham as the father, but it continues. At the end of the book of Genesis, another little menorah, the kind of thing that you might overlook because, we focus on the big full-page illuminations with all the gold and the color, but there's also a lot of details in this Bible that are very important to notice. So the menorah at the end of Genesis, because Genesis has the family tree, the patriarchal narratives, and then in Ruth, because Ruth is in the Gospel of Matthew's genealogy, and she's in this lineage of Jesus. What I love about these particular menorahs is that, to me, they look like textiles. They look like a hanging tapestry. And in the St. John's Bible, there's a lot of textile imagery. Donald Jackson really loves the whole imagery of textiles, and I think often it's very associated with women. So again, the women in the family tree, in Genesis, in Ruth. But another place where the menorah shows up, perhaps more subtly, is in Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones in chapter 37. And he's looking out over this valley of bones, and God tells him to command these bones to rise up. And of course, Ezekiel, like the rest of us, is thinking, you're crazy, God. They're dead bones. But they do. They rise up, they become enfleshed, they come back to life. And of course, the prophecy is a reminder that even when things seem dead, even when you are about to go into exile, as ancient Israel did, there is hope. God can make something come back to life. So here, the dead bones are symbolized at the bottom with imagery taken from 20th century genocides. Horrible acts of making things dead. Genocides from Cambodia, from Rwanda, and including a pile of eyeglasses that we know from the Holocaust, which I think is right there. Images that we see from the concentration camps. And yet at the top, it comes back to life. These bright rainbow patterns. In the St. John's Bible, the rainbow is a symbol of God's covenant with Noah and with all of humanity, that God will never again destroy the whole thing or hit the reset button, so to speak, as he did with the flood. But there's also the menorah. Again, the menorah, a symbol of continuation, and paired with not something from the ancient world, but something that happened within the last century, the Holocaust, and something that the Catholic Church really acknowledges as a beginning point of dialogue with and really repentance of old ways of relating to Jews and Judaism. So all of that in this illumination because of the menorah, because of the symbols that show up again and again. Now, another thing that Nostra Aetate called for was that not only would Jews and Christians engage in dialogue and peacemaking, but perhaps work together in projects of biblical scholarship. And Donald Jackson knew a man named Izzy Pludwinski, who is a Hebrew calligrapher. He's trained as a sofer. So these are the people who write Torah scrolls. There's a lot of rules to learn on how to make a Torah scroll that is ritually usable, that is kosher. And he also can write a mezuzah, thing on the doorpost, and tefillin, thing on the forehead. He's also a Hebrew calligrapher in his own right who does a lot of his own creative work, and he's an English calligrapher. And he's currently living in Israel. Now, I love the story of Izzy in the St. John's Bible because when they were looking for vellum suppliers, one of the places that Donald Jackson went was to Jerusalem because there's so much vellum that is needed for a Torah scroll. And there are suppliers there who can make vellum. And unfortunately, it didn't work. The way that the vellum is prepared for a Torah scroll wouldn't work with what Donald Jackson needed for the St. John's Bible. For example, they're only written on one side, but the St. John's Bible, the vellum was written on both sides of the page. But Donald Jackson remembers going into these vellum suppliers, and he said, you know, in England, you'd go to the vellum supplier, and they'd ask if you were going to make a handle for a cricket bat. And then in Jerusalem, you'd go and you'd say, I'm going to write the Word of God on a page, and they'd understand what you were talking about. So there's much that we can learn. So Izzy Pludwinski worked on the St. John's Bible. And on every single 2-page spread of the Old Testament books, he has the Hebrew name of the book. And there's other places where Hebrew shows up in the Illuminations. And that was his work. And as he said, it's not a simple thing for a good Jewish boy to write in a Christian Bible. But he did it. And so I think that's the kind of collaboration, the kind of peacemaking that we can make. My next chapter was about women in the St. John's Bible. I'm arguing that the St. John's Bible really highlights the presence and the witness of women. And this might not be the most typical place to start, if it will start. The woman who confronts the dragon in Revelation 12. And in this vision that John of Patmos has, he sees the woman is about to give birth, and there is a dragon, a giant monster who is going to devour her child as soon as it comes out. But thankfully, the Archangel Michael comes, defends her. She is taken away to a safe place. Now, in tradition, this woman is seen as either being the church, a symbol of the church under persecution, martyrdom, or Mary herself, the mother who, of course, gives birth to Jesus. I think this is, and in the St. John's Bible as a whole, the book of Revelation is kind of the crescendo. If the whole thing is a symphony, this is the final act. And Donald Jackson brought in the symbols, the images from all over the volumes that he and others had made before, all of the previous works of art, and brought them into the book of Revelation, like all of these motifs repeating. So the woman, the dragon in this illumination, and notice the focus is not on Michael. The focus is on the woman. We see Michael's sword in the bottom half, but the dragon is a coral snake, a snake that looks pretty but is highly poisonous. We see the snake all the way back at the beginning of the Bible with Adam and Eve. And I love this illumination because I think there's more than one way to look at it. First of all, the thing that might already surprise you about this is that Adam and Eve don't look like the way they are normally portrayed in Western art. They're black. These are images of people from Ethiopia, which of course, scientifically, where did humanity begin? But more than that, there's Eve. She's standing behind Adam, and she's got this smile on her face. And there's Adam, And when I first saw this, I thought, okay, this is a very traditional way to look at the fall. Here's Eve. She's taken the fruit, and she has this malicious grin on her face, a smirk, like something that is foreboding or threatening. And Adam looks kind of dead. But that was the first time I showed this, that was everyone's reaction. And then the second time I showed this to a very similar group of college students, only a few months later, they said, no. This is Eve. She's eaten the fruit. Her smile is the smile of one who has become enlightened. This is a very feminist way of looking at the Adam and Eve story, that she is not the one who is to blame. She is the one who had the initiative to make the first human act of independence, of free will, to not just do what God tells you, which is what we find ourselves living in now. Beings with free will to choose to ignore or to listen to God. So in that sense, you could say, oh, then her smile is a smile of somebody who's awakened, and that maybe Adam is the one who isn't quite there yet. There's a disconnect between them. They don't have any eye contact. But I want to say there's more than one way you could look at this image. There's an ambiguity to it. And it shows up in the Revelation 12. Now the next one, and the woman in Revelation 12 is also wearing this very elaborate headdress. Again, textile patterns. She looks like a queen, which is no coincidence because she is the queen. Queen Esther, who is also wearing this particular headdress. I know Esther is not a story that is very focused on in the church, but in synagogue, Esther gets a whole holiday, Purim, where they celebrate this woman who, when the Jews were living in diaspora, when they were under the rule of, I think it was the Persians, she becomes queen and stops her people from being killed. She's a woman who had a lot of courage and who saved the day. And yet she had to do so at what we might imagine would be great psychological risk, trauma. So on the right, we see her image is divided in half. And on the right, there's her Jewish side. Notice the menorah again. They know what they're doing. Her Jewish side, which is kind of shadowy. And then on the left, the queen, who has to put on this face, put on this makeup, this headdress, to do the work that she is doing. So Esther, Adam and Eve, but wait, there's more. There's this curious dress that the woman is wearing. There's a part of it that's blue with these cross symbols, and there's a part of it that's red, this bright red dress, very elaborate patterns. Well, Mary Magdalene in the Gospel of John gets a full page. And this is the scene, this is the resurrection. This is where Jesus says, "Do not touch me." And here the focus is not on Jesus. From our point of view, we only see the back of Jesus, but we see the light of his presence reflected in her face. And that is, she's the one that we can identify with. The human who is reacting to this presence. Now, of course, Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene and says, "Go tell the other disciples." She's the first person to preach the resurrection, because she goes to the disciples and says, "This is what I just saw." And in the beginning of John, there's a small illumination that is very easy to overlook. And this is where he is first calling Andrew and Simon Peter. And in this illumination, it's hard to see Jesus, but I think he is the silver figure in the crowd, all of the golden figures around him. We don't really get a good idea of what Jesus looks like in the St. John's Bible. I think that's a good thing. But there's Mary Magdalene's dress. In the calling of the disciples. Now it's off to the margins, perhaps because her work, her discipleship is marginalized, but in the art, she's there. Finally, there's this other motif. Not only does the woman in Revelation 12 have a headdress, but she has this elaborate circles and lines and this interconnected geometric pattern. And then at the bottom, there's some kind of holograph circle that's behind the snake. Now, in the St. John's Bible, this whole visual vocabulary, the circles and the lines, that pattern, I call it the tree of life pattern, because it alludes to woman wisdom. This is the personification of wisdom in Israelite literature. We see her in Proverbs. We also see her in books that are in the Catholic canon, but not the Protestant or Jewish canons, books like The Wisdom of Solomon or Sirach. So this illumination is from the Wisdom of Solomon. And this is one of my favorite to show. The text here is a poem describing woman wisdom. She is a reflection of eternal light, spotless mirror of the working of God, and an image of his goodness. And it's hard to see in this image, but this is holographic. There's a foil reflective component to it. So it's shaped like a mirror, a handheld mirror, and you look at it, and you may see yourself. You may also see this image of an elderly woman. Donald Jackson had this image. It was a photo taken from a National Geographic, and he had it on his studio wall for decades. Something struck him about it. He didn't know what. And then he was brainstorming this illumination, and he looked on his studio wall, and he says, "Oh, that's why I've been keeping this." This is one of those Holy Spirit moments, right? This was the image of woman wisdom that he wanted. Kindly, but also elderly. This is not your beautiful young lady. This is, sometimes I call her grandma wisdom. Maybe that's irreverent. So, that wisdom is feminine in Greek. She's called Sophia. To me, a powerful statement of the presence of women in this Bible. So the woman in Revelation 12 is all of these different characters and reminds you of all of these different figures. Adam and Eve, woman wisdom, Esther, Mary Magdalene. And in my book, I say this is the image for a brave woman of faith today. Look at her face. There is a dragon trying to eat her baby. She is in the middle of giving birth, but to me, she does not look afraid. She looks determined. She looks strong. She has her hand on her belly protectively. And in fact, Donald Jackson used his wife as the model for the hand. The next chapter of my book, and I should say, this is what's happening with the dialogue. It's playful. There's all these symbols. Art alludes to different art, and then you have the conversation between the texts, but you have to find these things and make these conversations and get your own imagination going. One more thing I will show you, because this is a Catholic Bible, Mary has to be there somewhere, and people are often surprised. She only shows up explicitly in one illumination. And this is the opening of the Gospel of John. And there is, went blank. Oh, there we go. Not used to this yet. There she is in the blue. And there's a shaft of light. And this is all gold, bright gold. So it's flickering, it's moving. As you move around, the light plays off of it. There are the angels again. But what I like is that there's also this border. And I think this is often overlooked, but to me the border is significant. Again, a textile. with these circles that have crosses in them. Another place that I have seen this appear is in the raising of Lazarus in John. They're kind of bundled around Lazarus. Here we're not outside the tomb looking in, waiting for Lazarus to come out. We are inside the tomb with Lazarus. We ourselves maybe are Lazarus coming back to life from whatever kind of spiritual death we might feel ourselves in. And there's the light at the end of the tunnel. But there's all of these textiles. Now, my little creative interpretation on this is that there's a parallel here. Mary makes life from no life, as any woman who gives birth does. She makes life happen. And isn't that what Jesus is doing to Lazarus? He is dead and he comes to life. What a powerful theological endorsement of what Mary does and what every woman who gives childbirth does. Making life. Resurrecting, except it's not resurrecting, there's no it's just surrecting. Is that a word? The next chapter of my book, and this is the final chapter, is about ecology. And this is something that in Catholic teaching has been a major concern, especially since 1979, when John Paul II gave an address, Peace with the Creator, Peace with all of creation. In Catholic understanding, as the poet Gerald Manley Hopkins put it, the world is charged with the grandeur of God. And we are not just here to trash this place, we are stewards. It is our responsibility to keep this trust for the next generation. It is a gift given to us that we should use, but not abuse. So, part of how that shows in the St. John's Bible is an endorsement of science, that understanding the world through science, through observation, helps us understand God. There's a medieval idea that the book of nature is parallel to the book of Revelation, the book of Scripture. And this shows up all over the St. John's Bible. So this is the creation. And there's 7 days, and each day gets a column. So we have the first day, the chaos. We have the separation of the waters, the sky, and so forth. What I really like about this is Genesis 1 has been at the center of so many of these debates between science and religion. Is it a young earth creation? Is it a 7-day creation? How do we make sense of this passage in light of what we know from modern science? And here, instead of taking one side of that debate, they work in scientific imagery. So, let's see, I have to show here. Down here, under the creation of fish, these are actually fossils, images of fish fossils that they've put into this Bible. And for the creation of humans, on the 6th day, there's cave art from Australia, from Africa, all of our modern understanding of creation, the creation of the cosmos, the creation of humankind, shows up in this Bible. And our contemporary ecological issues do too. So fast forward to the book of Revelation, there's the horsemen of the apocalypse. And these are terrifying figures for any time and for any generation: slaughter, war, famine, death. But Donald Jackson has imagined them as things much more present to our own time. So there's tanks, and there's oil derricks, and nuclear reactor symbols, all of the terrifying apocalyptic things of our own day and age, including the ones that we ourselves have created. Now, earlier I mentioned Chris Tomlin, the guy who did all the bugs. And he, let me go forward one. Got it? Okay. Sometimes the bugs tell us something about what's happening in Scripture and in Revelation. So here, this is put at the end of the Gospel of Mark. And at first you just think, it's a butterfly. That's nice. And it's a very beautifully painted, illustrated butterfly. This is a monarch butterfly going from moth to cocoon to beautiful butterfly form. But there's a parallel here to Jesus, who is human. He goes into the tomb. He seems dead, just like butterfly in its cocoon seems dead, and then comes back as something more amazing, something more beautiful and wondrous. So there's this parallel between what's happening in nature every day and Jesus himself. And finally, this is one of my favorites, the beginning of the Gospel of John. Those famous words, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This mystery of something immaterial, a word, becoming flesh. And Donald Jackson wanting to give us something to meditate on about this imagery of creation by using pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope in the background. So again, modern understanding of creation. Now, and also the Colossians hymn is here. He is the image of the invisible God. Now, I love this also because it's not only a beautiful image of Christ, you might say, in the middle of becoming enfleshed in gold. This is all gold. It's not only science put into the pages of this Bible, but I think this is also a great statement for what a calligrapher does. A calligrapher makes words flesh. We tend to think sometimes that the Bible is this, text out there in the ether, a collection of words. But here, the words themselves are part of the meaning. And every page of the St. John's Bible, the letters, the words, the shapes, the forms are given flesh, and that's beautiful in and of itself. Donald Jackson says that calligraphy is a very intimate art because it's made up close, and in every stroke of the calligrapher's pen, you can sense her heartbeat, her spirit, her breath. You put something of your very self into it. Incarnational. And you can't get that with print. So you talked about why would anybody do this in the 21st century? This is part of why. The form itself is part of the theology. And calligraphy, I would also say, is music on a page. And I'm going to end on this slide because I'm going to get a lot of mileage out of this slide. Calligraphy is music on a page. You can change the volume, you can change the color, the tone, the rhythm. The St. John's Bible Psalter is often seen as a little underwhelming because they didn't put a lot of illuminations in. On every single page of the Psalter, however, there are these little golden lines in the margins. And these are oscillographs of the monks of St. John's Abbey chanting the Psalms. As Benedictines, they do the whole Psalter every 4 weeks. So this is a big part of their life and their spirituality in the daily office. Calligraphy is music on a page, and when you open the St. John's Bible Book of Psalms, you see that music on every page. So because this is a lecture in Catholic experience, I do want to say, what is Catholic about the St. John's Bible? In one sense, of course, it's a Roman Catholic work. It's commissioned by a Benedictine monastery, although I don't know how many of the artists who worked on it were Catholic or even Christian. And you can ask about that in Q&A. But it's also Catholic in two broader senses. The Psalms Frontispiece, this opening illumination, tells us the Psalms are communal, liturgical, and that is a part of the Catholic vision. You do not engage Scripture only in a corner, silently, by yourself, although there is a place for that. But you sing it, you chant it in community, you wrestle with it in community. You learn how to read it, you learn new ways of seeing it, engaging it. And that's a very Catholic vision, community. But also it's universal. And that's another element of the Catholic vision of this. Not universal in the sense that you don't know what you believe or that it can be anything and everything, but universal in the sense they know they are rooted in a tradition. This is who we are. We are Benedictines. We are making a Bible. But we are looking out at the world, and we are finding meaning and truth in all kinds of different worldviews, science, history, our own problems of the 21st century. And we are looking at that through the lens of this tradition of the Bible. This opening illumination not only has oscillographs of the monks of St. John's Abbey chanting the Psalms, there are oscillographs of other traditions of sacred chant, Taoist, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Native American, all in this, where is it? Can I get it to work? There we go. All within this design, you see these different patterns of lines going horizontally and vertically. And this is a way of reminding us of the tradition of chant in all kinds of different religions, and the commonality of the human search for truth. So it's universal. It's rooted in one thing, but it's looking out at the whole world and bringing that back into the vision of this Bible. Thank you.
Maybe some patience to let them get to you so that we all can hear your question. And I'll let Jonathan manage the questions, but I'll be here if I can help.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, there was someone in the back.
Perhaps trivial, but interesting, at least to me.
Yeah.
Where have these 299 heritage copies gone? I know one's here in Hamilton Diocese, and I presume the original, the 300th, is at Collegeville, but just, do you know anything about that?
So the original is actually unbound. In part because they have traveling exhibits of different pages, and so it's hard to do that if you've already bound the original. The other thing that I didn't realize until I saw original pages for the first time is that they also haven't been cut yet, at least when I saw them in 2017. So that means, you have your measurement, say, of what the page looks like, but the sheet of vellum, because it's animal skin, it's, animals don't come in precise sizes. So there's edges, and the artist will write little notes in the margins like, this page is really not working well. The kinds of things of, this is a frustrating day, or this quill is really not writing the way I want it to. And we find those things in medieval manuscripts too. So as for the heritage editions, they're in universities, dioceses, few hospitals. Some places have bought all 7 volumes, and they're still selling them. If you would like to buy a Bible, you can. It is a little on the expensive end, but you could get one. And there's also Heritage Edition for a year, where an institution will rent 1 volume for a year. So this is part of their way of disseminating it. But there's also trade editions, which you can buy for about $30 or $40 a volume from Liturgical Press, and they're about, I don't know, this big per volume. So they're disseminating it in different ways.
This is a story you might take with you.
Yes.
There were some volumes of the Bible here on campus a couple of years ago, and I work with people from other religions beyond Christian. So I brought that group to witness the Bible, and we had a lovely presentation from Christina, and then we got to come up and touch the Bible. It was fabulous.
Yeah.
The Hindu man in our group was there and discovered that the Bible was bound in calf skin. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh dear, this might be difficult. And I said to him, like, how do you feel about this? And he said, I can't imagine a more beautiful thing for my sacred animal to be part of. Mm.
That is, yes, this is not a vegan Bible. But that is a good story, thank you. I might use that again. Yes. Oh, Mike's coming. Oh, okay.
Okay. This is maybe a technical question, I don't know if you'd know, but did the scribes do the writing, leaving space for the illumination? Did the artist draw it and then hand it to the scribes to fill in the spaces? Do you know?
So the layout was done on computer before any of the volumes, before each volume was written. So they'll plan out, they'll say, for example, this text will get a full page illumination, this one will get a quarter page, this one might get half a page. And then they had to design a font that was the same size as the script that Donald Jackson came up with for the project, and using that, make the layout. So sometimes what you see in medieval Bibles is that you'll give pages to different scribes, and let's say you say, well, you have 5 pages to write out this chapter, and you might estimate wrong, and so you're left with either a lot of blank space at the end that looks awkward, or you're struggling to get it in till the bottom of the page, and that doesn't look good either. So having the layout gave them the freedom to know what they were doing, because as the scribe was writing each page, she or he would have the computer layout in front of them, and they would know even exactly what words would be in each line. So everything was planned out, and the medievals didn't have computers. So I think they were very grateful, Donald Jackson and his team, to have that.
I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the ethical themes, like you've identified, I understand, women and ecology, and did you focus a bit more on that in your book?
So each one of those is a chapter in my book, and I gave you some of the greatest hits from each chapter. Be grateful that I'm not here giving you everything. Those, and I'm not necessarily claiming that those are the only things you can find or the only way to look at it. This was what I made of it after spending many hours looking at it and meditating on it and showing it to other people. All right. Thank you very much. Oh, I can. Okay.
Thank you, John. I'd like to invite up Ann Jameson, Dr. Ann Jameson, who's the Director of Catechesis for the Diocese of Hamilton, and she's also actually on the Board of Governors here at St. Jerome's University, to say thank you to Jonathan on your behalf.
Well, I thank all of you for entrusting me with the thank you. You've used the music metaphor so many times this evening, Jonathan, and you've talked about the creation of the St. John's Bible as a great symphony. And what I thought was often when somebody comes to show you beautiful pictures, It can feel a lot like isolated notes. And you've given us a great gift, I think, in helping us to see whole strings of harmony. And that's been very instructive and very helpful. I'm very grateful for that. I'm sure we all are. You've also talked a lot about embodiment and incarnation, and I would say that my experience of this evening is that you embody the igniting of the imagination. I actually walked in this evening just behind Jonathan, and if he thought he was in an apocalypse, I thought, and just so you know, the Canadian term is snowpocalypse. That's the correct term. I thought, what a scholar, what an imagination, what a person who desires to know. Because he leaned over and ran his fingers in the snow and said, gee, it's not as fluffy as I thought it'd be. And I thought, wow, your PhD is going to be brilliant, and we're all going to be very excited when that happens too. So thank you so much for coming in the cold and warming us with the fire of your enthusiasm and the beauty of what you have seen in the St. John's Bible. It's been a great gift to us.
Just a couple of announcements. Some of you are well aware that St. Jerome's University did host a year with the St. John's Bible, and you may have noticed that the volumes haven't left yet for various reasons that I won't get into. However, for some of you who may not yet have had an opportunity to see one up close and personal, I am happy after we're finished the question and answer, and as you're mingling and looking at the book table where Jonathan's book is, for example, I'm happy to open up that and bring that volume out. We have Gospels and Acts in the atrium, so I'm happy to open that up and give some of you who might not have seen one of these volumes up close a chance to come and look at some illuminations. So I'm just saying that out loud in case you, I don't know how you missed it, but in case you've missed it, I'll give you a chance to do that. So just some announcement before we go. We do send out regular emails about upcoming speakers. So if you are not currently on our email or our mailing list and you want to receive information both about the lectures at Catholic Experience but also about other lectures and events that are happening in here at St. Jerome's University, then just go to the welcome table and sign up there so we make sure that we can get you on that list. And every year, we're happy to be able to present this program of speakers to the community, and we can do it because of the generosity of so many people who helped this to happen. If you too would like to make some donation to that, there's also a little basket, I think, also on the welcome table. You can go to the Fair Trade. Our Social Justice Committee is selling a variety of fairly traded products, some coffee, some tea, probably some chocolate, so you can pick that up on your way out. And again, this evening, Wordsworth, our local independent bookseller, is here with a variety of books, but also Jonathan's book is here, and Jonathan is willing to sit and chat with you. Well, not going to be here for 2 or 3 hours, but he's willing to chat with you as he signs your book. I want to let you know that the next lecture in Catholic Experience is going to take place a month from now on Friday, March the 1st. Sister Helen Prejean, whom some of you may have heard her when she was here, I think it's about 15 years ago. She is a Southern storyteller, and she is the founder, along with the rest of her community down in New Orleans, of the Ministry Against the Death Penalty. And she's going to be here to present a lecture entitled, Dead Man Walking, The Journey Continues. And in the talk, Sister Helen is going to bring us on a journey about how she herself got involved with this ministry and the impact that it's had both on her and the people that it serves. This ministry believes in the dignity of all people. It expresses mercy and justice by standing side by side with those who are outcasts. It promotes compassionate alternatives to the death penalty, and it supports the families of victims. So I hope you'll come for that. The next talk in our St. Jerome's reading series, and that highlights a number of authors, is going to take place on Friday, March the 8th at 4:30. And Melanie Fishbane is going to be here and speak about her work. The next Bridges lecture is going to take place on Wednesday, March the 17th. And that lecture is entitled Touch, the Science and Culture of Contact in More Than Human Worlds. The image is beautiful for that one, for the poster. This lecture is going to feature Emilia DeFalco, who works in the field of medical humanities, and India Morrison, who works in neuroscience. So that's another intriguing lecture. And lastly, just saying thank you to all of you for coming. Good as always to have you with us. Thank you for all the ways in which I hope that you are helping to spread the news about all the lectures and events that we have here at the university. I hope I will see you back here on March the 1st. In the meantime, stay warm, safe travels home tonight, and we'll see you as soon as possible, hopefully in March. Take care. Good night.